to start when you want to read fantasy is one of the questions that I get asked quite a bit, so I finally decided to film an introduction to fantasy video, and that's exactly what you guys are about to watch now. Hi everyone, it is Samantha, and I am very excited about today's video. I have decided to do kind of an updated video because I feel like I did one a little over a year ago about where you should start if you're looking to start reading fantasy. I get asked this question a lot, so I figured I would give you guys some of my recommendations for what I think would be a good place to start for reading your first fantasy books, and I hope you guys will enjoy it. So the first set of books that I want to talk about is one of my favorite book series, and that is the Rhaeria Revelation series by Michael J. Sullivan. This is a very good epic fantasy series. It features Royce and Hadrian, who are two thieves that make up the crime organization Rhaeria. Yes, it's pretty much just the two of them. And the story starts out when they are tasked with stealing a sword from the king's chapel. But upon arriving at the king's chapel to steal the sword, they instead encounter the dead king. They are arrested and framed for his murder, but they are released by the king's daughter, who knows that it was not them, and tasks them with kidnapping her brother to save him from the plot that is in place to kill the entire royal family. So Royce and Hadrian do just that. They escape, they take the prince with them, and kind of the whole story takes off from there. Really, really good book series. It has everything you could want in a fantasy series. It has dwarves, there's elves, there is political intrigue, and it's really, really, really good, but it's very accessible and very easy to get into for somebody who is new to fantasy. And this does look like a chunker, but this series actually consisted of 6 books, but when he published them in physical form, because they originally were just an ebook, the publisher had him bind them up into 2 books. So there's actually 2 books in this one book. It's a bind up of 2 books. Same thing with the other 2. So this one is Sept of Swords, and it contains the bind up of The Crown Conspiracy and Avon-Partha. The second volume is Rise of Empire and includes Nifron Rising and the Emerald Storm. And then the third bind up is my favorite, and it's Heir of Novaron, and it contains the 2 volumes Wintertide and Precipicus. This series is so good, guys. Michael J. Sullivan, even though he takes some of the tried and true fantasy tropes, he still adds his own new twist to it, and you guys will fall in love with Royce and Hadrian. They're a fantastic duo. Their friendship is great. Royce's sarcasm is on point. There is not very much romance. There is a little bit towards the end, so it's not romance heavy. There's a lot of action. There's just a lot going on, and I absolutely adore this series, and I think it would be a great place to start if you are new to fantasy. The next series I would recommend if you are new to fantasy is The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, with the first book being Aragon. So The Inheritance Cycle has very mixed reviews, but I personally really enjoyed it. The first book isn't the best book, but you need to take into account that when he first wrote this book, he was only 15 years old, and that was when it was published. So for a 15-year-old, it's a pretty dang good book, and the books continue to get really good. The first one does pull a lot from the Lord of the Rings, but he really takes on his own story and characters in the later books. The story follows a young boy, Aragon, who comes across a dragon egg. At this point, dragons, everybody thinks, are extinct, but he ends up taking this dragon egg home, and it ends up hatching for him, and he becomes bonded to this dragon. He ends up getting tracked down by the Dark Lord, and he basically has to escape with Brom, who ends up teaching him kind of the tools of the trade, and trying to hide from the Empire, this evil empire, because the evil ruler is in place. And he sets out with his dragon that he learns to become her rider, because dragon riders used to kind of police the land and bring peace and prosperity to this world before they were basically exterminated. So he kind of sets out to regain that and bring the world back to a place of peace. I personally really enjoyed this book series. I think that especially after the first book, it really takes on a life of its own. The series also has a lot of the traditional fantasy tropes. There's lots of dwarves, lots of elves, it has dragons, it has everything you would want, but Christopher Paolini really ends up taking his own twist on the books, and I really love the books. Book 3 is my personal favorite, and it is just fantastic. A lot of action sequences that'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, and the dragons in this are just epic. I love the dragons. The dragons are so cool. So yes, I really recommend this book series if you are new to fantasy. I think it's something that is really easy for you to get into, and it will really introduce you to a lot of the things you'll find in the fantasy world, but it doesn't overcomplicate it. It makes it really accessible and easy to get into. So the series consists of book 1, which is Aragon, book 2, which is Eldest, book 3, which is Brisingar, and finally book 4, which is Inheritance. And they are chunkers, but trust me, they go pretty fast. They're pretty quick to get through. The next book series I want to talk about is the Mageborn series by Michael Manning. I don't actually hear a lot of people talk about this series, but I really enjoyed it. I actually first picked it up about 4 or 5 years ago when I first got my Kindle, and I fell in love with it right away. It's a very interesting fantasy series. It follows Mordecai, who is our main character. He's the son of a blacksmith, but he was actually a foundling. He was found by the blacksmith and his wife as a child. His parents were killed. But soon Mordecai discovers that he actually has powers, magical powers, in a time when the Mageborn kind of don't really exist and if they do, they're really controlled by the government. So he ends up trying to figure out how to harness his power while becoming embroiled in a plot to kill the Duke of Lancaster, who is basically a family friend. He grew up, the Duke of Lancaster's son and him are friends, as well as in a plot to kind of overthrow the kingdom itself. Really, really good series. I actually did not even realize that there was 2 more books to the series that I still need to read, so I plan on rereading this one myself. But again, I find this one to be really accessible. It really introduces you to a lot of things that you find in fantasy, but again, it makes it really, really accessible. There's political intrigue, there is magic, there are magical beings, there are gods, so the people are kind of fighting against the gods. It's really, really interesting and unique. It has quite a bit of humor, and the magic system itself, it has some really unique twists to it, which I found really, really good. I just really enjoyed the series. I found it to be fast-paced and fun. It was one of those you just can't put down. You just want to keep reading and figuring out what's going to happen. So it just made it really, really good, and another one that I really recommend if you are starting out in fantasy. And the Mageborn series consists of Mageborn the Blacksmith's Son. Book 2 is The Line of a Lineal. Book 3 is The Archmage Unbound. Book 4 is The Godstone War. And Book 5 is The Final Redemption. The next book series I want to talk about is The Legends of Mirwood series by Jeff Wheeler. I read this one a few years ago too and absolutely loved it. It is a trilogy. It consists of The Wretched of Mirwood, The Blight of Mirwood, and The Scourge of Mirwood. It follows a young girl, Leah, who is basically a kitchen servant. She is an orphan. She's kind of just led a life of toil and hardship, and all she's wanted to do is learn to read and write. She also harnesses and holds within herself a magical ability, which is really only supposed to be available to those who are noble-born. So Leah one day is working in the kitchen when this squire comes in, stumbling into the kitchen. He is on the run. She ends up hiding him and becomes embroiled and ends up in a plot that is threatening the kingdom itself. She ends up escaping with the squire, and together they kind of set out to figure out what is going on to protect the king, to protect the kingdom, and again to find out more about herself. I really like this series. It was a really strong female character, which I really appreciated. Again, a series that I found to be very accessible if you're new to fantasy. A lot of action goes on. There's a little bit of romance, but not too much. I think it was handled fairly well, and I just really like the main character, Leah. She's a very strong female character. It also has a lot of twists and turns, which I really, really enjoyed. I thought it brought some uniqueness to the story, and I just really enjoyed it, and I think it's a great one if you are just starting out. The next trilogy that I want to talk about is one by Tamara Pierce, and that is Tamara Pierce's Becca Cooper trilogy. The first book is Terrier. If you have not read Tamara Pierce before, I actually recommend starting with this one. Her other books are a little bit more middle grade, as they do become increasingly more adult as the series goes along. This one is a prequel novel, so it's perfectly acceptable if you want to start out in Tamara Pierce's world. It follows Becca Cooper, who is a rookie in the Lord Provost Guard, basically the police force, and she has a unique ability in that she can speak to the dead, something that she tries to keep secret, but something that she feels that she can use to help bring victims to justice. Really, really good series. I really love Tamara Pierce's work. She's known for her very strong female characters, a lot of feminist values in her books, which I really, really enjoy. Really pretty basic magic system in these books, so it's easy to understand. It also deals with gods and political intrigue and things like that. But I really, really enjoyed this book series. I love Becca Cooper herself. She's very sassy and very strong-willed, and I just really, really thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, it's such a good series, and the series itself has a lot of twists and turns, particularly the third book. And if you guys have read the series, you will know exactly what I'm talking about in the third book. I'm still not over it. But regardless to say, I really, really enjoyed it. There's just a lot of good things about this book trilogy. I actually really want to reread it now that I'm talking about it. It's just so good. It's so good, guys. So good. But again, I feel like it's not overly complicated. It doesn't have a lot of complex plot arcs, if that is something that intimidates you about fantasy. And it will also introduce you to Tamara Pierce's amazing world of Tortal, because it is amazing. Anyway, this is a trilogy, and it consists of the first book, Terrier, book 2 is Bloodhound, and finally book 3 is Mastiff. And finally, the final trilogy should come as no surprise if you're new to my channel, and that is the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. I have to say that if you want to get started with Robin Hobb and you're new to fantasy, I actually think that this would be a good place to start, because her series is not overly complicated in terms of the magic system and things like that, and they're pretty easy to follow along with. I actually have a very in-depth review of this book trilogy, which I will link here somewhere down in the box and probably on this video, so you guys can check that out if you want a little more detail. Basically, it follows Fitz, who is a young bastard son of Chivalry, who is the prince in waiting. He is to become king, but Upon finding he has a son, he abdicates his throne and he later dies. Fitz is brought to the castle and he ends up being raised by his grandfather, King Shrewd. He ends up becoming enlisted by Shade, the king's assassin, to become the assassin in training. Because of this, he is allowed to live in the castle and get an education. And Fitz is unique in that he holds two different types of magic. The first is the skill, which is the ability to communicate across vast distances with another person who has the same ability, as well as to subtly manipulate people and their minds for those who do not have the skill. He also has the wit, which allows him to communicate with animals. I absolutely love the series. If you know me and my channel, you will know this. I just find it to be very, very, very well done. Robin Hobb has created a very unique, fascinating world, and you just can't help but really feel strong emotions when reading this book series. You feel for the characters, you feel very invested, and you just cannot help but follow along. And I adore it. This series and all of her books end up having a lot of really unique things that occur. There are dragons that end up coming into play. There's just really unique magic systems, really, really unique characters. Just everything about it I absolutely adore. The writing is very much typical to 90s fantasy. Some people would compare it to kind of reading a little bit like a classic. I would say it's a lot more easy to read than a classic book if that's something that intimidates you. I just find them to be very, 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 very well written, good books. I'm just gonna throw that out there. I think you guys all know how much I love Robin Hobb. I just absolutely adore them. There's a lot of plot twists and things that go on, and Fitz and the Fool, who you are introduced to in this series, are two of my all-time favorite characters ever. The Fool being probably one of my favorite characters who have ever graced any book page. I mean, it's just so amazing, and the friendship between Fitz and the Fool is absolutely beautiful. So again, I highly recommend it. If you are looking to dive into Robin Hobb, this is the place to start because all of her books build off of this book series. So the Live Ship Traders series takes place shortly after this one, and there's a lot of crossovers between events and characters, and then after this we're back with Fitz and the Fool in the Tawny Man trilogy. And again, events are referenced in the Live Ship books, so they just keep building off one another, and Fitz and the Fool are the prominent characters in almost all of her books. So again, really good, and I highly recommend you start with these if you're looking to advance into Robin Hobb and fantasy. Again, the first book is Assassin's Apprentice, book 2 is Royal Assassin, and book 3 is Assassin's Quest. They do get progressively bigger, but trust me, you will be very invested in the events that are occurring, and you won't want to put them down. Alright guys, that is it today for my introduction to fantasy video. I hope this helped you, and hopefully you can pick up some of these books and discover your new love for fantasy, perhaps. Let me know if you have any questions about these books or anything else you want to throw down in the comments, and I will try and answer them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, happy reading. Bye!